Recording in progress.
Good evening. This is the CBRC meeting of March 16th, 2023. I want to thank my vice chairs, Mariah Hudson and Taz Ferguson, for
Recording in
sharing the
progress.
last meeting. Good evening. This is the CBRC having my bout with COVID. Please don't get that. It's March 16th, 2023. And thank you very much for. I want to thank responsibilities at the last minute. And we have unusually has request for public comment this
Recording in
evening. And so, in reviewing the agenda with Jordan ahead of time, I suggested that we take the public comment at the start of our meeting. We will follow the protocols that the board uses, which is to limit the public comment to 3 minutes, and we will not respond to the public comment. We will just receive it. Public commenters are invited to submit their comments in writing. Do so to Jordan Cooper, and if any supplemental materials you may wish to include, and those will be distributed to the committee members on our portal. So let's have our first commenter, please.
Okay, so I'm going to promote Mashari to panelists. You should see something on your screen.
And would you please state your name and spell it, and that's the board procedure, and then the timer will start after you've done that. So.
Yeah. And by the way, I have the timer on my phone. And I'll keep my headset on, so you'll hear a sound go off when it's hit 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Perfect. Hi, my name is Mashari Tyson, Mashari Tyson, Tyson. I'm the founder of Black Excellence Group. Good evening. Thank you for having me here during the proposed 23-24 budget season. For context, Black Excellence Group is a racial equity and social justice community partner of Portland Public Schools, and we've been collaborating with the superintendent, district leaders, and variety of departments initiatives over the past 3 years. And tonight, I come representing 200 Black students and their families that we serve each week across King, Rosa Parks, Markham, and Bridal Mile, as well as advocacy for struggling middle school students at Jackson and West Sylvan. We are asking for a commitment to an unapologetically protected RESJ community partner funding effort this year for the 2023-2024 budget season. We are asking for a demonstration of the superintendent's leadership team to have equity values demonstrated that they've communicated through the proposed budget allocations. And specifically, we're asking for increased RESJ funding, which is currently proposed to be reduced. We are asking for a protection of the RESJ funds, and additionally, to specifically increase the RESJ funding for the ongoing demands and urgent needs for the community to be involved in student supports. I don't believe in the scarcity mindset, and I'm confident that the school district leadership will find a multi-pronged funding source approach that's necessary to increase RESJ partner funds for 23-24. Increased investment in RESJ partnerships is critical to the district achieving the board goals, living out our PPS values, realizing the vision, and delivering on the strategic goals and student outcomes. These equitable funding efforts for Black students means that we're there for them. We're ensuring that they're reflected by the staff every single week. We're not uprooting community partners and dropping off after a specific grade level or a specific year. Equitable funding means prioritizing these RESJ partnerships because they are seen as a value. because of the impact that they have on our most marginalized Black students so that they can thrive. Currently, there are so many Black students in PPS that do not physically or emotionally feel safe in the buildings. And we have heard loud and clear, the elementary through high school levels, directly from students and families, that they need more supports. It is unimaginable that we would keep steady the RESJ budget, let alone do cuts. We are asking for an increase in RESJ partnership and professional development efforts so that we can meaningfully move the needle. As Dr. Proctor talked about in the last budget conversation, it is about continuous improvement and year-over-year progress. And we have had decades of underinvestment in these Black students, and we need to right now commit to actually having the increased RESJ community partner support so that we can actually correct this ship and be able to deliver on many of what we've heard from the community. Last chunk, we have heard loud and clear beyond the survey that Black families, through input, community partner feedback in all the quarterly partner meetings, instructional framework, developmental continuum efforts, safety committee, focus groups, CBSE, the budget focus groups with Black families, RESJ efforts, middle school redesign, grant feedback sessions with the Fishbowl. They want more supports, and the school leaders are asking for it. And all of the district leaders are aware of the dismal condition of Black students in our district. And we need to increase RESJ partnerships to make sure that we are there for them. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I'm balancing two things at the same time. I'm going to promote Javon to panelist. You should see something on your screen. Javon, let us know if it's
Hello,
working. Oh, there you are.
Javon
Perfect.
Williams, J-A-V as in Victor, O-N-N-E, last name Williams, W-I-L-L-I-A-M-S. And I am a graduate of Portland Public School. I am a proud graduate of an HBCU. I am a community member, and I am the current director of student and parent services here at Self Enhancement. I didn't share all of that information with you to run off my resume, but to show you that a relationship between schools and community partners works. And it doesn't only work just for me, or it didn't work just for me. It works for many others, and it continues to work. And to further illustrate how that relationship works, I would like to introduce and give the rest of my remaining time to the Dean of Students at Jefferson High School, Jamie Kazi.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Jamie Kazi, J-A-Y-M-E, Kazi, C-A-U-S-E-Y. And as Javon said, I am the Dean of Students here at Jefferson High School. I'm here because SEI asked me to be here, and I will do anything for SEI because I see the impact and the value that they have for our students here at Jefferson in the building on a day-to-day basis. I'm in the role of dean right now. I've also worked as a teacher here, and I've seen the impact that the coordinators have with the students, both in the classroom. When I was working, they were coming in, supporting students, helping them with their work, giving them a safe space for them outside the classroom if they needed an alternative setting to do their work. And now in my role as dean, seeing their wraparound services, getting students to school. With Jefferson, a lot of our students come from different parts of the area in Portland. They support them getting to school, support their attendance when they're at school, and then also provide them with safe spaces both in the building and outside the building after school as well. So of course, when SEI said, would you speak on the impact that SEI has on Jefferson and students here? I agreed because we couldn't do our job as a school without SEI in the school. They work with students, but they also work work with teachers and families to really wrap around students in all the ways that they show up inside our building. They embody what it means to work with the whole child, recognizing that if you're focused just on a student's academics or behavior, you're missing part of the picture of what makes that student who they are and how they show up each day in a school building. And I believe that our SEI partners truly know our students better than anyone on our staff. I appreciate the energy that they bring to our hallways, the ways that they support kids, they love kids, but also hold kids accountable. And sometimes we see different pieces of that on our school level, and we're so wrapped up in discipline or in grades or academics that we forget to support each part of a student. But SEI never loses the focus of what it means to truly love and care for our kids. And as a school with a large Black population, it's also our kids who need it the most in the African American community here in Portland.
Thank you very much for your comments tonight. And again, I'll remind the public commenters, please submit your testimony and writing to Jordan Cooper at pps.net. And any supplemental material you may wish to include as well. And thank you very much for sharing with us. And we'll move on with our agenda now.
Thank you, Javon. Thank you, Jamie. You have my emails already, so feel free to send something.
So moving ahead with our agenda, the next item is, are there any updates from the group chair, co-chair, vice chair, and the reminder of that we have a board work session next week, notwithstanding that the schools are out for student attendance. But the board still works during that period of time, as well Jordan and other people on the staff there. And we're invited to participate in the work session that they're having on Tuesday, March 21st at 6:30. That's 18:30, 24-hour time. And you need to let Jordan know by not later than tomorrow whether you're planning to attend, because that helps with meal planning, name placards, and all that kind of stuff. So, does anybody have any questions regard to what's been posted on the CBRC portal, the Q&A? I read through them myself just yesterday, and I'd have to say that some of the questions I asked, I'm a little disappointed with the responses that I got, and I noticed there are some questions that have been asked that have yet to receive answers, and so maybe Jordan or Berto can comment about those, and anything else. If you have hit that thing that says raise your hand, and I believe I can see on the screen if you're wanting to ask a question. You see any, Jordan? I don't see.
Karanja has his hand, and I will just quickly chime in and share that the answering of the questions is ongoing. It just comes down to capacity, finding some time. There's some questions that are fairly easy to track down answers to, and there's others where in between schedules, folks are making a concerted effort to answer. So it's continues to be on the to-dos. I know also there were a handful of questions from this Tuesday as well that our board office is going to be posting, and I know folks have been working to answer in between.
Berto, let me ask the question.
Yes.
It was my understanding that we were going to be given the questions that the board members themselves had asked and what responses had been given them, as well as the board being sharing the questions we have asked and the answers we've been given. So
Correct. That is correct. And Jordan's been coordinating with the board office, but I'll let them share additional details.
Just on that part, Roseanne and I did connect, so I had to have access to the board questions. I took all of them from this past Tuesday's meeting have been answered, and so I have copied those into our CBRC Q&A document. But I'm gonna continue throwing board questions in that document. Board questions and answers as they come up, and I'm going to label them on the far left column. You'll see I've labeled it board question, just so you know where it's coming from. But let me know if anything's missing, or it's all me just manually updating. So I'm going to do my best to keep up with it.
And to Mariah's comment, yes, y'all have me here. Sometimes it's good to just ask the question, and if I don't cover it in the presentation, we can leverage this opportunity to answer. If I know the answer, I'll certainly chime in. Karanja?
Oh, never mind. I just wanted to state on the record, I wanted to agree with Chair Roger that I was a little disappointed with the answers of my questions yesterday at the meeting the other day. I felt like my questions wasn't really answered. So I just wanted to put that on the record.
This isn't really in response to the subject at hand, but there was a question about the public notices of our meetings. They usually go out about 48 hours ahead of time, and they're listed on the board website. But as a longstanding member of the committee, I follow all the board meetings and their subcommittee meetings. And so I'm on the public notice list, and you can request to be put on that. You can tailor it so you're only getting the notices for CBRC or the policy committee or whatever board committee you want to follow, or if you want to follow all of them. And you do that by submitting that to Kay Bradshaw at pps.net, and she's the board secretary. So anyway, let's continue on. Are there other questions of committee members? I guess I'm not seeing the hands. So if you see hands of anyone? No?
I'm sorry, I keep leaving my sound on. You're probably hearing my clicking. Please let me know if that's happening. But I just wanted to also mention that I've updated a couple sections of the portal with new resources. So the resources page has the recording from Tuesday's work session with the board. So if you missed it, you can go check it out there. And then the front page of the portal also has some updates to it with new links and so yeah, I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that.
As I was answering a phone call from Jordan earlier, I typically watch board meetings when I'm not there in person by using the YouTube channel. The board also has a channel, and it depends on what your cable network capability is. It's 128 on some, it's 328 on Comcast and so on. So anyway, I happened to notice when I was watching policy committee meeting that was at 4 o'clock today. The work session that we've all participated in last week is already on there. So moving on, we've gotten an update on the portal from Jordan, I want to honor the fact that we have Noberto with us this evening, and his time is valuable, as well as every committee member's time is as well. If there are no further questions, Berto, would you go ahead and make your presentation?
Yep, sounds like a plan. So then I'm going to share my screen. It's always a toss-up. Let's assume it works.
I just changed the settings, so you should be able to.
Oh, awesome. I think y'all should be able to see my screen. Yep. Fantastic. And so for today, I wanted to spend some time on two topics, somewhat related, but then also somewhat separate. For this upcoming budget work session next Tuesday, we're going to take a look at it at our resource planning at a system level. I know we have a lot of discussions about discrete funding activities, but I want to share some context to help build some understanding for the conversation at next Tuesdays, or at least a topic, at least a general intent and conversation around some of the resource planning conversations, not just for this upcoming budget year, but some of the broader conversations moving forward. And then a second component is to talk about the local option levy. This may be somewhat familiar to folks who were here last year, but I know it's a fairly brand new group. So I do want to spend a few minutes just introducing the local option levy, as that's the review of the local option levy is subsequently a critical component of CBRC. So for today, just some information regarding general fund's impact or investment and planning context for the upcoming work session, and then I'll share some insight into the local option levy. And from an overall big picture perspective, this is our budget for the current year. And this is going to sound familiar, but I like to reiterate it to folks because it always seems easy to just move money from one pot to the other, but that's not the case. They're restricted funding sources, or whether it's restricted by statute at the state level or at the federal level, or IRS considerations. There's always a variety of different rules that come into play. And our largest funding source, our largest fund to support our day-to-day operations is our general fund. And this year, it's at about $100 million. And that includes a local option levy, which we'll talk a little bit about some more in a few, and includes our fund balance. And I can't see folks on the screen, so if there is a question or something, feel free to chime in. But of course, we'll save some time as well at the end for discussion. So to help understand some of the global fiscal picture for this upcoming biennium, it's good to start where we are right now. And and that's just as important, because one of the fiscal aspects that we rely on is our fund balance. So for this current year, as of February, we're estimating to have about $800 million of projected revenue. This includes about 51 million of our contingency, so it's our fund balance. We're looking at about $729 million in expenses for this current year. And that includes about a $15 million in savings from some of the activities of the hiring chill or hiring freeze that we've implemented, along with other costs cutting activities in order to add money to our ending fund balance. And this is important because the more money we add to our ending fund balance, the more money that will be available to support our activities in the upcoming years. It is important to note that at the start of this year, we started a fund balance of about 98.8 million, and we're anticipating to spend that down to 73. And the reason that's important is, again, we're that highlight, if we're having to rely on our fund balance, if we're having to rely on our savings account, that's a signal that our expenditures are outpacing our revenue. And on this slide, this is now when we start talking about next year. And based on some of our preliminary projections with the information we have, we know that the legislature has not approved a budget yet, our biennium budget for next year, but ongoing conversations are happening. And the Oregon Department of Education has released their initial estimate. And their initial estimates are based on information we provide, our enrollment projections, on the enrollment projections of all the other districts in the state, tax collections, and a variety of different inputs go into these estimates that we then use to start generating our initial models for this upcoming year, and really this upcoming biennium. So to orient you all, this first column here is the worst case scenario. This is that 9.6 billion, having to spend down our fund balance down to 39 million is the call for action. The reason why we are focusing on identifying savings for next year, the reason why we are aligning staffing to enrollment, and a lot of the rationale for making some of the shifts to balance our budget. However, we will need to use our fund balance again in order to balance our budget. And our current projection is that we'll meet the 5% bottom threshold of our fund balance, but following year, in fiscal year 25, that's not the case. So although we're working towards identifying savings and thinking differently about our resources for this upcoming year, we're going to need to keep that same momentum into the following year in order to avoid going to continue to spend down our fund balance. And so as you hear conversations around our minimum fund balance target and why that's important, it all plays a role into managing our revenue to support our expenditures, but we should also be looking at our rate of expenditures. And I believe Jordan updated the presentation or shared this deck as well. So if y'all will have access to it or may already have access to it as well. And so then when we think about our general fund and we think about our largest investments, it comes down to people. We are a people-driven organization. We don't build widgets. We don't do that. It's on people. We receive funding from the state, and there's all these other variables that drive how we invest and drive like the funding. And so when we look at our general fund, our largest investment is in people, and then the vast majority of those investments are in our schools. So to orient you all, this is a screenshot from our budget book, from this year's budget book. I have the link here and the page number of the budget of that specific budget page and this table. And for this upcoming budget cycle, we're going to generate this information again. And so to orient folks, it starts giving you a breakdown of like, okay, well, how much is the district spending at elementary K-5? Well, that's $144 million. Extracurricular activities, middle school programs. And so you can go down the list to see this current year, we adopted a budget anticipating $406 million with about 3,000 FTEs that are coded. And I use the word coded because this nomenclature, this numbering system is dictated by the Department of Education. So we follow those rules, those protocols to then associate these investments. And so, sorry about that. I thought I was on the screen. I was trying to scroll up. And so then when we start looking at some of these other categories, we see that, okay, well, that's about 15 million in attendant social workers. And you can start seeing the breakdown here as it goes through. I'm going to encourage y'all to click on the link and scroll down the page. You can see there's several other tables there, but I like to focus on this page because it helps, again, system level, right? Big picture. As myself and Alberto, I'm unable to see what's happening in the 81 schools or in the all the different departments. But as we roll up the information, right, how much are we spending that? As we think about some of the current themes, how much this starts providing this global view. And one of the mechanisms that drives resources, it's the primary mechanism that drives resources to schools, is our staffing plan. And so how many teachers will this one school get? Well, it's going to depend on the ratios that are established by the staffing plan, and it's going to depend on the number of students enrolled. And so you start seeing this equation play out. If we have 300 schools and one school, if we have 52 students in first grade at one school, then that'll then generate so many different teaching allocations. And when all of that information is rolled into the schools, one of the other aspects of it is class sizes. So what are the class sizes? And this information here is the school staffing formula and school enrollment are the primary basis to generate the number of teachers, thus impacting class sizes. So this chart here is information for this current year that shows the distribution across K-5 classrooms. So when we start talking about class sizes as an example, or an average or a medium may not necessarily tell the whole story, but this attempts to help expand on the ranges. So this current year, we had a first grade class, smallest from 11 up to a class that was 29. So if we see this blue area here, we'll see then that from 9 or so, and it looks like there's probably more classes between 20 to 25, 20 to 24 range, more homerooms that are in those respective class sizes. And again, this is talking about how much. So as we start our conversations into this upcoming work session, these were some of the comments that came up at this Tuesday, was around how well the student experience, and it's part of, in order for us to sustainably achieve the goals in our strategic plan, it's not just about how much, it's about how well the resources are being used to create those desired student experiences. So it's this ongoing relationship between school funding and staffing. We know that we're investing the vast majority of our resources into schools. And so then how is that playing itself out? And a dimension to this that's very important is equity. We talk about equity and investment. So back to, we know that the vast majority of our dollars are going towards supporting schools and the student experience, but how are we also accounting for equity? And in this chart, we start seeing some of the differentiated spending per pupil between our CSI schools, our Title I schools, our TSI schools, and non-designated schools. And to just refresh folks' memory, our comprehensive school improvement schools have, or maybe better yet, to think about our designated schools versus our non-designated schools. So CSI, Title I, TSI, these are our designated schools. These schools, through different metrics, have shown a higher need compared to our non-designated schools. So,
Doug, could I interrupt
yes.
you? Just, would you please spell out what the acronyms mean? CSI, TSI, and Title I, and so on.
Sure thing.
yes,
So CSI schools, a comprehensive school improvement. And it's a federal designation where a school has been identified in more than one subgroup of historically underserved students that haven't met certain proficiency goals. Targeted TSI, that means is really focusing on one specific subgroup. So maybe Black students didn't achieve certain levels of proficiency. And so there's a designation there that basically requires additional resources, additional attention and supports. A Title I school, a title school is a federal designation that's associated with economically disadvantaged at certain levels of poverty that would then, as a proxy, relate to need. And we have our K-5 schools. We have, in this past year, we had 6 schools that were CSI. Some of these numbers have changed, as some schools have promoted out, but we know that there's still needs. That doesn't mean that they go cold turkey. There's some transition plans to support CSI and our TSI schools. But looking at this information, our funding formula and our staffing models have not changed. We still differentiate by need and send more resources. Again, how much, right? So in the framing of how much, we know that we're sending more dollars to schools that have higher needs. In volume 2,
I got a quick question for you.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So is the 18 and the 17.6, is that in thousand? Is that per student? Is that 18,000?
Correct.
What is that exactly?
No, you're right. Yep.
And then
These
also
are
I
averages.
noticed, so if I didn't know CSI was a federal, is that a federal grant, or is it a federal mandate, or is it a federal, is it part of ESSA?
I believe it is part of the Every Student Succeeds Act, and it's, to your question, whether it's a federal mandate or federal grant, it's somewhat both. It is a federal designation that gets their specific metrics and requirements that the federal government requires, and each state generates their plan on how they plan to achieve that. So the state then holds the districts accountable, and based on that, there's specific funding formulas that generate additional dollars to support these schools.
Are they just for K-8? Because I see in the MS, and do we have CSI for high school? I don't see any for the middle school.
they're for all schools across the country, all sorts of schools. So when we see 0, that means we do not have any middle schools that were designated as comprehensive, as needing comprehensive interventions.
So what would qualify a designation?
I don't have all the metrics, but we can certainly get them. There's several measurements, and they'll probably be readily available on ODE's website. But we can certainly pull that information to and share it with you all.
Beto, I don't know whether CSI and TSI and so on fluctuate, but I know, for example, Title I over the several years I've been on the committee, the federal government has changed its definition as to what that is from year to year, and some former Title I school might not be a Title I school this year, and so on.
Yeah.
I know Franklin is to be a Title I next year, and it hasn't been historically before, and so Karaja, you're asking good questions, but also some of those definitions change at the federal level, and we're the tail that they're the tail that wags the dog.
And that's a good call out and question, where I think, like, for example, Title I, it's not PPS that makes that decision, or PPS doesn't make then the decision for a school to be CSI or TSI. These are governed at higher levels from the state to federal. And as an example, with Title I, for the most part, I'd say in at least within the past few years, Title I the definition has been consistent, but the variable that has been changing is poverty. So the federal government designates a couple billions of dollars, and they have a formula based on poverty indexes that the US Census manages. And then based on that, they then will determine, okay, Oregon, you get this much, California, you get this much, Oklahoma, you get this much. And through that same formula, it then gets distributed to schools. So if Portland gets more affluent, then that means there are less title dollars to be distributed to other schools. That may not necessarily mean there's less title need, but it would just mean that there's less dollars for potentially the same number of students. And so
do you have schools that receive all 4 pots of money, like the CSI, that could be a Title I school? Is there any schools that can double stack on the funding streams?
And and thank you for that. So that transitions well into our next slide. So our volume 2 of the budget book, so we're going to generate something similar for this upcoming year. This data represents this year. And for example, Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks is K-5, and it's both a CSI and a Title I school. And to orient you to this table, it has a heat map, which indicates need based on math proficiency and reaching certain goals, to then, well, how much funding are these schools receiving? And the idea is back to the framing around equitable distribution of resources, trying to provide more funding, the goal of providing more funding where we identify more need. This document then provides again, system level overview. It's itemized by school, but looking at the whole picture, it's a double click of the prior slide. So we look at it as averages across some of these schools. Then in our budget book, we go a little deeper and provide kind of like the breakdown by school.
And I would point out to the committee that this page gets looked at very critically by the board. You'll see the last column in green indicates that Alliance is receiving 24,000 plus per student, and then you go all the way down to I've got a symbol on top of the but you see some schools are well below 10 grand per student. So that's
Yeah.
also informs the discussion that's current before the policy committee about foundations and all their activities and so on. So things are interrelated.
And the information here is based on our enrollment projections at the start of the year. And so when we take a look at our enrollment, and then that's where you get the per pupil. So, and in this, if you click on the link and go to this book, each page, we have these few summary tables, but then we have a school profile. We have a page for each school that adds a little bit more detail as well. So I would recommend taking a look at volume 2. And like I said, as we get towards the superintendent's proposed budget, which is volume 1, which holds some of the broader tables across the system, we'll have that information, and then we'll be working towards getting volume 2 ready along the process as well. And so at our upcoming board work session for this Tuesday, was there a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, I was trying to square that those numbers with the ones from the previous one. The CSI ones in the previous slide, they showed an average 18,000 per student, but I only see one school year with over 18,000, everyone else below. And it seems to me that these numbers are on average higher.
And these are FY22. So these are from last year. And so then knowing that at different snapshots through time, for example, this information was prepared in May of the year for the upcoming year. And this was taking a look at more of actuals after the year had started.
I'm a little confused now with that. That was a great question too. That was a great point. Can you explain that one more time? Sorry, just for clarity purposes.
Yep. So the information we have here is from last year's numbers. So it's information from a year ago. So this does not represent the current year. Over here, this column represents more recent information. I think that's probably the easiest way to explain it.
Okay, I understand. But still, his question was, we saw an average of 18,000, but I don't see that average.
Right, you won't see that average because right here we're looking at like 6 schools for a specific category in FY22, and you would need to then carve out those specific schools to try to get to those numbers. And then there's, when we think about the moments in time, so for example, this information for 2023, this current year, was put together in April before, or it was probably May, leading into the upcoming school year. So there's some slight variations, but then we go ahead and provide updates based on actuals.
Can you share with us real quick why a school like Alliance will receive 24,000 per student, but a school like Roosevelt, who has similar numbers in the statistics over to the left, receives 10,000? I'm just curious.
Yeah, the easiest explanation is economies of scale. So some schools, Alliance may have I don't know how many students Alliance has, but let's say, for example, 200 students versus Roosevelt or another school that may have 500 students or 900 students. And that gets into this information. So some schools, there are the staffing thresholds that get applied. If you notice over here, depending on the designation, a school, depending on their size, will have specific ratios that come into play. And so that is going to then drive not just where you start the funding level, but also if you have a school with 1,000 students versus a school with 1,500 students, that per average is also going to look different just through the way the numbers work through economies of scale.
I feel like that math to me is not really adding up. It seems like it's two different types of statistic problems. If I'm not mistaken. For example, the document that we see here, so I see the average of 24,000 and then Roosevelt, for example, 10,000. And what you're saying is that Alliance may have a lesser enrollment than Roosevelt, which will increase the average amount that we spend per student. But how does that math equal to the overall average of the 18? I understand when you said the 18,000 was a projection, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then the actuals is what you're showing now. But it still seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if somebody is noticing this as well. It just seems like two different types of statistic problems to me.
Yeah, I think, and I would also, it's essentially if you have $1,000 and you divide $1,000 by 20, you're going to have $50 per person versus $1,000 or 500. You're going to have or 20. Excuse me. You're going to have 100. You're going to have a different. So you have $1,000 divided by 20 versus $1,000 divided by 40. That's going to then equal a different number. And I am going to share the profile page for each one because there isn't different type of math going on. There isn't a statistical problem here. I think it's, if we take a look at the school profile pages, it'll help explain that a little better. So I opened up volume 2 and we had said Alliance. So here's a profile for Alliance. So the way the formula works is laid out in this green table here. And it is for this current year, an assumption of 198 students. And then we see, okay, well, based on the salaries and costs, we see that the total for this school is about 4.8 million that's being invested in this school. Oops, maybe that's a little too big. And when we take into account the number of students, which was 198, you then get your ratio. The other school was Roosevelt. And we see, wow, that's a much bigger population than 198 students. You know, what does the staffing formula generate for this school? And when we get to their breakdown, it's like, okay, well, that they generate this school is approximately $14.7 million divided by the 1448. You then get to 10,123.
Even if the enrollment is different, shouldn't the average still be the same though? Even so,
No.
we would have to put more money into Roosevelt to make the average the same,
No,
to make it more equitable.
Because the staffing ratios are going to fluctuate based on the total number of students. So it's not driven by a given ratio. It's not driven by a given per pupil funding amount. It's driven by the staffing formula, which has the ratios. And so if you have 1,500 students, that staffing formula that I showed earlier is going to generate specific inputs versus 190 students, then it's going to generate different inputs.
So can I ask here? So I think when you talk about this, I think the way it sounds when you talk about economics of scales or these kind of things, and I think you have some sort of like, if you have a bigger entity, you have some costs that are fixed, that are similar in size, no matter how big the institution is. So if you have a bigger institution, right, you divide about the same cost by by a larger number of students, right, you get a lower number. The staffing cost, that staffing key, what you showed me, that has some differences there, but I don't think it can account for that kind of spread. That spread is like twice as much. So I think it needs to include some of these like building costs or some sort of fixed costs in order to make that spread. I'm not sure we need to go into details, but I want to point out one issue with this. So I think like the calculations, they're, it's like you're just tallying up the budget and then divided by the school chart. And if you have some sort of and so you can get that number there. The problem is coming back to the CSI schools, right? If I try to understand these, like how much do we spend per student numbers as a measure of quality, I look at the CSI school and say like, oh, we're spending more on these schools. That's great, right? But if these numbers per students are partly influenced by the size of the school, and the size of the school partly is reflected by the economics of scale, which means that bigger schools are more efficient, right? What you might see there is that the CSI schools are small, right? They have a high number there, which looks good, but really just reflects the fact that they're small. And it doesn't necessarily mean that number reflects some sort of like a better, a higher real number of or a higher dollar value per student, as you might think these numbers suggest.
And I would welcome folks to take a look at the presentation from our November work session, which goes into more detail of like subsequently that breakdown, because there are some variable costs and fixed costs that come into this, right? And in the formula, there's just some given fixed costs across the schools, regardless of size. You're going to have some additional schools that will have other foundation measures that are supporting them versus not. You're going to have other schools that are title that will be receiving certain additional funding, schools that are student investment accounts that aren't attributed to the funding formula, but are attributed to other needs that have been identified. And so even under to your point regarding like a bigger school may generate a smaller per average, but it may not necessarily be accounting for need. That's where we had our outside consultants come in. This is who we're going to be meeting with next Tuesday, ERS, who went a little deeper into the conversation around how much, because we have several conversations about how much, we have several conversations around like equity and being able to parse out to say, well, there are indeed additional dollars going to higher need schools that aren't necessarily attributed to size when you start looking at size. And then this is where the information in that other presentation would be helpful, a breakdown of like, well, what are we spending those additional dollars on, that gives some insight into, it's not just holding steady for core teaching staff, but then what are the additional investments that are being made for the schools that have higher needs. And it provides some further breakdowns. So, okay, well, it could be a social worker, it could be additional quality or forget what the acronym stands for, but additional mental health supports. So that other slide, we'll share it, or that other deck, we'll make sure to put it in a link as well that just has maybe 3 times as many slides as what I prepared for today, that adds into more detail.
Yeah, I think that would be good. I guess I don't want to derail our conversation here, but I just want to emphasize that, like, it's like these kind of like the comparison that beforehand, those high level comparisons you had on those between these different types of schools, CSI, Title I, so on, so on. They're hard to interpret with that kind of complexity. If the school size is the most important factor affecting these kind of numbers, or an important factor that affects this, like I would, something like an adjust, like I would like to see some sort of like a CSI school and then compare that to a non-designated school that have a similar number of students. And that kind of comparison would provide, I think, a more meaningful comparison or more meaningful assessment of like how much more spending we get there. And I'm emphasizing this point because, right, I think that's really important for the school board to see whether how much more these schools get in terms of, like, this is a little, maybe technical, but I'm saying this from some sort of constructive point, right?
I appreciate that. And as a matter of fact, that slide deck provides some more direct comparisons between like the high school. So we'll make sure to share it, because it speaks to the point of like, how are we having these robust conversations with our board? Because we do talk about how much, we do talk about like equity and ensuring that happens, but we don't want it to happen just because of haphazard statistical result because of size, but the intentionality of actually giving more funding to schools per need, regardless of size. And so I think that's, Stefan, to your point, kind of like accounting for that. And so those are like some of the conversations we've been having earlier in the year as we consider, again, our biggest investment goes into schools. And so then how are we thinking about how well are we spending and investing these funding sources? We start getting into some of the specific domains. And so we know that when we look at some of the just our profiles and portraits of like a white middle school student compared to a black middle school student, but what's the experience? Like, how well do we get into, how well are the experiences happening or opportunities to explore? Because we see that the MAP scores and the outcomes are not where they need to be. And so we know when we talk about how much, like we are putting a lot of funding into this. So then the next level of the conversation is to explore the opportunities for how well.
Do you guys know the data currently? Like, for example, school leadership quality, teacher quality and diversity. Do you guys have the data, the current data in those particular tiers? And then going back to the different math comment, I think Stefan kind of brought it to light. That's what I was kind of referring to when he broke down the ratio of the teacher ratio, and then the teacher ratio, and then how that compares to the enrollment. If that's the same, that's to me, I feel like the math is different. That was the what I was kind of referring to. But yeah, but going back to that comment and that question.
So it's some of the data that we're still working through and collecting with respect to the upcoming board work session. we're going to, I know our ERS, the external partner, has been working to collect this information and put it in like our fiscal context as we think about how much funding, but really like what are the opportunities to explore when we think about instructional time and quality of experience for our students. So once those materials are posted, we'll definitely send them along. I believe they may be posted sometime tomorrow in time for our board work session. So we'll definitely know more come Tuesday.
Oh, can you go back to that slide? So I was just wondering, like, the experience of high quality diverse leaders, is that shouldn't that be like readily available of knowing the experience of the principals that are in these high need schools?
I can inquire from our departments. Other questions?
I'd point out again to committee members that the work session next week on the 21st involves this consultant. What's the initials again?
ERS.
ERS, right? And it's a critical meeting for all of us to watch, and I volunteer at Franklin, for example. It happens to be one of the 2 high schools that is over-enrolled, has been over-enrolled ever since it was remodeled. And the staffing ratios, I believe, are different at Franklin than they are at Roosevelt, for example, even though Roosevelt is a lower enrollment, but has higher need. So.
Norberto, could you, you mentioned a slide deck you were going to share earlier. Which was that again?
It is a slide deck from a November board work session.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah, it's on board book. I think it's late November or early November.
I'll go digging. I'll find it.
Thank you.
Can you share that last slide again so we're in the discussion part of the agenda, correct?
Yes, and we still would need to talk about local option levy. So let me pull this up here 1 second.
The instructional time, can you also note this question, the instructional time and attention, how would that be measured? The expectations of power and materials, like I would like to know how that is measured as well.
Yeah, we can certainly pass these questions on to the team.
Thank you.
Okay, well, in the interest of Berto's time, let's let him go ahead with the local option levy presentation.
And it's not about my time, it's about you all. So thank you for hanging on. So for the next part, really kind of provide a broad general overview of the local option levy, as that's going to be an important piece of the work that CBRC does. And the local option levy rests as part of the general fund. And so when we think about the different funding sources, local option levy resides in the general fund. And so this blue slice then translates into the various different funding sources. And these percentages are from last year's budget, but there's been minimal change when we compare to this year's budget. And it's just important to note that the local option levy is a critical piece of the general fund. And when we think back to supporting our day-to-day operations, the local option levy is specifically for supporting teaching positions and classroom supports. And so the local option levy was approved by voters in 2014, and it was renewed in November 2019 for another 5 years, and it'll be up for renewal. Right now, we're anticipating potentially on the May 2024 ballot to renew for another 5 years in 2025. And it's also important to note that the state school fund formula excludes a local option levy, which is a benefit to us, because normally these type of local taxes are offset state funding from the state school fund formula. So that's one of the benefits of the local option levy, is that it does indeed provide additional resources. And from a mechanics perspective, the tax rate, it's about $1.99 per 1,000 of assessed value. So as an example, a home with a $250,000 cost would generate approximately $4,150 in eligible tax, so about almost $500 per year. And we collect these funds, and they're maintained in our chart of accounts. There's a specific line item that accounts for the levy funds that are used to pay for teacher salaries and benefits. And so then towards the end of the school year, the total levy funds are calculated based on the average teacher compensation, and all of that funding, it goes to support the teaching allocation. So for example, if $104 million is collected and the average teacher salary and benefit is $117,000, then we would then assume that the levy would have paid for approximately 889 teachers out of close to 2,500 classroom teachers. So this current year, we're still working through the calculations, but we're estimating approximately 880 teaching positions. But we're going to come back to CVRC in April with some updated information so that you all can validate the information, because the local option levy requires independent citizen oversight to ensure that those dollars are are only used for the purposes approved by local voters. So CVRC is that oversight body that is appointed by the board. And as I mentioned, over the next month, we'll then generate a few reports for your review to ensure that we get that oversight or CVRC certification. And just some additional highlights here. I think in summary, the Community Budget Review Committee is an oversight body of the local option levy. The local option levy is calculated on assessed property values, not enrollment, and is separate from the calculations of the state school fund grant. And so the approximate $100 million in local option levy that is part of the general fund supports about a third of the classroom teachers. So just reiterating how critical this is, how critical of a funding source this is for PPS.
And just for the committee's edification, the question always is, well, why don't we raise the rate and we raise more money and so on? And then you bump into another concept that called compression, which it takes the Berto type expertise to explain in lay language, and I won't attempt to do so. But the consultants that advise the board have recommended historically that we not go out for more than what we are currently asking.
I think another way of thinking about it is that there's certain limits that are statutory, and so we have to keep an eye on those limits, because if we collect more funding and we go above those limits, then those additional dollars that are collected actually get redistributed at the state level. So we want to be careful, want to keep Portland dollars in Portland for the sake of our district. But yeah, that concludes my presentations here. So I'll turn it over to you, Roger. Yeah.
Okay. Committee members, we have some more questions. Stephen, Karaja, others? I'm not seeing any, but I may not have the full screen.
I think this is just to track here. This. Let me just see where I get this right. Let me see. The local option levy is about 13% of the direct budget, right? The general fund revenue. I hope I use the right terms here. But it pays for about a third of the teachers, right? So then there's about 100 million. So when we spend about 300 million on teachers out of 800 million, so we have about 500 million in our expenses. And so that would include things like ongoing cost of running buildings. Is that correct?
Cost of buildings, principals, counselors. And so there are just the best way to look at it is when we go to that first table I showed in the slide that gives you a breakdown of all the different allocations. That's a good way of taking a look at that breakdown of like, okay, where are all the different funding sources and how is that being applied?
I think rule of thumb, roughly personnel costs the district about 80% of its budget.
Right, but then the personnel cost, the teacher expenses are only a part of a personnel cost, because otherwise it wouldn't come out to that 80%.
I understand that, but you've got to have secretaries and support staff for teachers in classrooms. So.
Olympia has hand up.
I had a question around, and I don't think this will happen, but historically, do we have a plan if the levy does not pass?
We have not actively discussed a plan if the levy does not pass. I preferably don't want to put that into the universe, but I think it would be just an incredible, difficult challenge to reduce a budget by $100 million, and we would have to look at all the different levers to balance the budget.
Haven't our levies historically passed by quite a good margin?
Yeah,
I mean,
they
upwards
have.
of 70%. Yeah, it's a shoe in here in Portland.
60 to 80%. So
let's not jinx it, but yes.
Yeah, but just for historical reasons, you may wonder why we might be going out before the expiration of the existing levy, and it's historically the district learned in 2011 that having the local option levy and a capital bond measure on the same ballot did not go down well with the voters. They didn't support the bond measure, and they did support the levy. And so historically speaking, the district will only put one item on the ballot at a time, and so that's why we'll probably go out for the local option levy in 24 instead of 25, and so on. So
yeah, and just to double down on Mariah's statement, I mean, we've had incredible support, just overall community support, whether from 20 years ago or a decade or so ago with the Portland arts tax to approving the bonds to just incredible turnout to support the local option levy. So I think that's something to be extremely grateful for.
And the arts tax, incidentally, committee members, only benefits K through 8 or K through 5, not any middle school or high school. So that's not always understood, but. So any other questions? Jordan, have we gone through our agenda? I can't see.
So the next part of the agenda was just to come back as a committee to the board work session on Tuesday, if there were any follow-ups or questions, or for committee members that did attend, if there's anything they wanted to share with folks who weren't able to be there. But before that, it looks like Lisa has her hand up.
Okay.
Lisa?
Yeah, actually mine was in response to that, because I just wanted to bring up some kind of themes or issues that were brought up the other night that I just thought I'd kind of get our group thinking about. But if we're not there yet in the conversation, then I'll wait until we.
No, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I think, some of Karanja's and some of the board members, I think kind of the accountability piece and how are we measuring some of the programs and initiatives and if they're working or not seem to be, I think, something that we can focus on in our response to the budget. If we don't see what we're looking for, like making that recommendation. And I think the other thing was the ESSER funds being used to fund full-time employees, knowing that money is going away. And I know Alona brought up that, kind of looking for a commitment from the board that if those programs are successful, that they make a commitment that they would be continued finding other funding sources. So those were kind of the two takeaways I took from the other night of some things that this committee can focus on in our response to the budget. So I just wanted to bring those up. And there may have been a few more I didn't capture, but those were the two that stuck out to me.
Those are good observations, I think. Olympia, your hand is up, I see.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think, personally, I was thinking about this after the work session about this program, using ESSER funds for FTE. And I think my concern was we won't see the results we want to see in the first year, but that doesn't mean we should necessarily cancel the program. So I just want to kind of point that out.
I think that's the ongoing concern that historically we have not favored using one-time funds to fund positions that are intended to last several years in the future, and I personally think that the district needs to identify what pots would they identify that would be utilized in the future should that funding go away. There's no indication that the federal government is going to renew ESSER funding in any shape or form. And as I pointed out in that work session, we have a split Congress right now between parties and so on, and makes any prospect of future legislation doubtful anyway. So So, are there any other questions? I'm looking for hands on the screen. I don't see any. Jordan, would you remind us when we meet again?
Yes. I failed once more to have it up on my screen. To be fair, I feel like you jumped so fast. So our next meeting is April 13th. And I'll just use this second as one last reminder. I sent you all an email to let me know by tomorrow if you're going to come to the board work session on Tuesday next week. And let me know if you're going to be in person or virtual. Great.
And let me remind committee members, every year we're entering the budget season where it really gets cramped, and we'll be called upon to meet more frequently probably than what is currently on our schedule. And once we ultimately have the budget in hand on the 25th of April, I believe is when it's presented, we'll have scant short days to review it. And Lisa last year was our yeoman in service and keeping us on task of assembling our comments and so on. And we may draw upon her expertise again to help us do that as well. But look for some hard days ahead. And I thank you all for participating this evening, and Berto for your presentation. And if you have questions of staff, shoot them to Jordan, and he'll facilitate getting answers to you, and to the rest of the committee via the portal. So if there are no further comments, I'll adjourn the meeting, and we're again ahead of schedule. So goody for us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.